What's up, everybody? This is the Ikesinspirations podcast, and today I have an exciting guest named Nick Jain. Nick is the CEO of IdeaScale. He went to Harvard Business School. He has multiple degrees in STEM, and he's a very well accomplished man. So I'm excited to have him on and just learn a lot about his story and how he got to where he is today.
Thanks so much for having me on the show, Ike, and for the wonderful introduction. It's a lot to live up to.
Yeah, no, thank you, man. So I've noticed that you grew up in India, man. I would love to talk about that. I know you came from India. What was it like coming from India and then bringing yourself to the States?
Sure. So I actually went, I lived in India till about the age of 5. And then I lived in Canada till I was about 18.
Wow.
But Canada's pretty similar to the United States. So I have a bit of a funny story to recount. So as my parents are driving me from the airport in Vancouver, so imagine I've never been outside India at this point. I'm at age 5. I've grown up 100% in India, speaking Hindi, don't speak English at this point.
Wow.
And the preschool I went to in India is called Wendy's. Okay.
Wendy's. Oh.
So as we are land in Vancouver, I noticed that there's this in the Vancouver airport. I noticed that there's this restaurant called Wendy's, and I remember very distinctly this asking my parents, "Hey, is this where I'm going to go to school?" So. Because same name, right? Wendy's, the restaurant chain, versus Wendy's, my little preschool. And they obviously have the little cute girl mascot. So it looks very child friendly. Yeah. So that was really the first kind of transitional experience I had between moving from India to Canada. But in Canada, I had a very wonderful childhood. I grew up in a small middle-class community called Langley, lots of berries, wonderful place to grow up, incredibly safe, and tremendous education system, which I benefited from.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you ended up going from India to Canada to the States. What made you transition to America?
Sure. So it was a few things. Number one, I got into a really good university in the United States. So that was really helpful. Number two, the university was a liberal arts college. So even though I knew career-wise I wanted to end up in science and technology, I thought it was interesting that I would get to go read other things. So I still read a ton of literature. I'm reading like Moby Dick right now and Paradise Lost. So it was nice to go to a liberal arts college where I'd be able to do more than just science stuff.
Yeah.
And then thirdly, just frankly, they offered me a lot of financial aid and scholarships, which was me. My parents were both blue collar employees. So when someone offers you a lot of money to show up,
of course,
it's very easy to say yes.
Of course. Yeah, I went to Northeastern University and I got my doctorate degree in pharmacy. And one of the reasons why I chose Northeastern was that they gave me the most money. So I understand.
College degrees are expensive, right? Yeah, when I was going, it was around 55 grand US a year between housing and tuition and food and books. So 55 grand a year that was more than my parents made. So so it was helpful to get a lot of financial.
Yeah, no, college tuition is very expensive, and you seem to have a lot of college experience because you went to Harvard Business School, which I would love for you to talk about because Harvard and all, it has that mystique that not a lot of people get to experience. And then you've also graduated with 3 degrees, so in STEM, right? Or more? Was it more than 3 degrees?
No, I have 3. Well, 1 degree, but 3 majors for undergraduate, and then totally separately an MBA from Harvard Business School. So I only have 2 degrees. To be clear.
Gotcha. But 3 majors. Yeah. So what was your experience at Harvard Business School like?
Sure. So look, I'll say a few things. Number one is the old joke about any school like Harvard is the hardest part about succeeding there is getting in, right? Once you're there, there's no grade, so it's really difficult to flunk out if you don't, as long as you show up to class. And it's so that's the dirty secret. That's it's really hard to get in, but once you're there, it's pretty much impossible to fail out as long as you show up to class, because a large part of your attendance is just based on showing. A large part of your grade is just based on showing up to class, which is again kind of horrifying in retrospect.
Yeah.
So a few things, right? Number one, the curriculum is interesting because during Harvard Business School is broken into 2 years. In the first year, everyone takes the same class, and even though it's 1,000 people in the school, you're taking classes with the same 95 or 100 of them for your entire first year. Every single class, your marketing class, your operations class, your finance class, and then year 2 is the elective year where you choose your own subjects. So that was a really good way to structure the the educational part of it, because I got to, even though I was coming with experience in certain areas, I was forced to go learn about areas that I knew nothing about, such as human capital or HR, factory operations, which have come in handy for me. That's number one. Number two is it's a bit of a weird place for somebody like me who came from more humble beginnings. A lot of people at places like Harvard are from well-established families, right? I had classmates whose parents were billionaires or, were presidents of countries. And that's really, that's not an intimidating experience, but an unusual experience, because you might be working on the weekends, or you might be studying on the weekends, and other people are out partying in foreign countries.
Yeah.
So that was a bit of a good, weird experience, but all in all, it was a really good experience. Boston is really cold. I hated the cold. So
Yeah.
especially, I lived about 10 minutes off campus. So in the winters, it really sucked
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, you went to Northeastern,
I went to
so,
Houston, so yeah, I know.
trudging across the snow, in, even a 10 or 15-minute walk in January sucks.
Yeah, yeah. No, I hear you, man. I grew up in Boston, and I've been there for like most of my life, and then I moved to Philadelphia after I graduated from college, and then I ended up moving to Atlanta. So every time I move, it's down south because I
Yeah.
just hate the cold. So I
So
I
I
definitely
just moved to
empathize that.
Philadelphia about 2 years ago
Oh
now, just
wow,
2 years.
cool.
And I would love to move further south, but I think this is as far south as my wife is willing to move. If it
Oh,
were totally my choice,
you would go.
I would be somewhere in like Florida.
Yep.
Maybe not right now with the hurricane, but
Yeah.
I love the heat. I love the beaches. I
Yeah,
love,
man.
yeah.
Nah, no, down south. I mean, I love down south. The culture, the people, the weather. It's more for me, you know. And so one thing you said about Harvard Business School. I mean, Harvard that I just want to critique or ask about was you mentioned that like no one can flunk once they get in. Is that Harvard Business School or just all of Harvard? Like
Well, so I didn't attend the undergrad. So at business
oh
school, so I mean, you can flunk out of medical school, you can flunk out of law school, right? The
oh
business school, it's really, really difficult to fail out of, because there are no real grades.
oh
Okay,
okay yeah
a large portion of your, like, pretty much the entirety of your grades are based on showing up to class.
gotcha
So that's true at the business school. The undergraduate, it is also, so while I'm not there, the rumor is that it's difficult to get in,
yeah
but you basically can't fail out, because there are some incredibly easy majors where if you're struggling in more difficult concentrations, you'll switch to the easier majors and you'll
yeah
graduate eventually. So
yeah
again, very hard to get into institutions like Harvard, very hard to fail out. And I don't think this is unique to Harvard. I think it is also true at Yale and Stanford,
gotcha.
and maybe not MIT. MIT, I think they'll actually fail you out.
Okay. Yeah. So isn't essentially like what was your particular intention with going to Harvard Business School? Is it like was it for the connections? Was it did you have a particular goal in mind? You know. Yeah.
Yeah, I had two goals, just to be frank. Number one is connections, right? For
Yeah.
somebody like me from humble beginnings, having Harvard on your resume or
Of
building
course.
the connections that you do is incredibly valuable from a career perspective, right? I'm able to call people up
Yeah.
who know nothing about me but are willing to take my call simply because where I went
Of
to
course.
graduate to business school.
Of course.
It's unfortunate the world works that way, but people really care about where you went to
It's
school.
the reality. Yeah.
Yeah, that's number one. And number two was from an educational perspective, right? I was coming in with a lot of knowledge in finance and strategy, but I knew nothing about marketing. I knew nothing about operations. I knew nothing about human capital and technology. And if you eventually want to run a business, which was my goal, right? I wanted to
Mhm.
be CEO somewhere. It's important for a executive of a company to know about the different parts of a company and how to run them well, right? You can't be a
Mhm.
good leader at a large organization if you don't know how human capital works, if you don't know how to run a marketing department, if you don't know how to run your IT department. Those are all important skills that I was
Yeah.
certainly lacking showing up to business school, and I think it helped me develop those skills.
Gotcha. Yeah. And so it seems like, education is very important to you, which I think is great, man. I'm all about reading, learning. I got books behind me. I'm always constantly reading. I have this podcast as a form to just educate myself. And I'm curious to you, as someone who is a triple major with 2 degrees, education has been like a primary part of who you are. Why is it so important to you?
Sure. So it dates back very specifically to my family, both my parents, but especially my grandmother, she raised me by herself till I was
Yeah.
about the age of 5. And there's a saying in Hindi, which is an Indian language. It roughly translates to education is the one wealth that no one can take away from you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's education doesn't mean degrees. It doesn't mean where you went to school or
Yeah.
having a diploma, but it's the idea that knowledge or learning,
Yeah.
some life can take, you can have a car accident and your health can be taken away. You can have, a financial crisis and your money can be taken away, your house, your car.
Yeah.
But what you learn and how that improves you as a person,
Yeah.
no one can ever take that away from you. And that was my grandmother impressed that on me in an early age, that you should pursue education and learning for its own sake. Now, it's great that it helps you with career and job and all that other stuff, but really the reason you learn is to make yourself a better human being. And I think that's been a core part of, like, it was just impressed on me at a very young age, and it's continued on to this day, where I genuinely believe education is a moral good, above and beyond just a practical good that helps you get a job.
Yeah, no, I hear that. My mom always used to tell me that you can always lose your job, but they can never take away your education. And yeah, that definitely rings true, man. And so, as you were speaking, you also mentioned, like, it's very important for you to be a CEO of a company. Like, you went into Harvard Business School, envisioning that one day you're going to be a CEO, and now you're eventually the CEO of IdeaScale. Just curious, was being a CEO something you always wanted to do, or is it just something that, like, happened as a result of being in a business school?
Sure. So my career goals have changed over time. When I was entering college, I very specifically wanted to go get a PhD and go into academia, specifically research mathematics or physics. And throughout college, I love that. Again, I majored in mathematics and physics, so I really am deeply passionate about that. I still spend a bunch of time reading about those subjects and reading academic journals.
Yeah.
So I'm still very passionate about that. But during college, I realized, look, I love the quantitative side of things. I love understanding how the world works. But I also discovered two other passions. Number one, I like working with people. I'm an extrovert. And number two, I like the competitive nature, the competitive, fast-paced nature of the business world. Science, you may be running an experiment for 5 or 10 years without a strong feedback. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of my research experiments, one of the scientists have been working on it for 12 years because it took 12 years to build the experiment and collect data. And I wanted a bit of a faster iterative loop or feedback.
I hear that.
So coming out of college, I was like, I want to end up in the business world. And specifically, I would love to lead a company because I think I can make a difference. What gives me the most joy professionally in life is building things, right?
Yeah.
In high school, I was a carpenter. I used to work summers as a carpenter, and it was great to see, like, at the end of a summer that you built a building, whether it be a temple, a mall, a house. And I get a lot of personal joy from that. And that applies at the company level too, right? Over the past 2 years since I've led IdeaScale, our headcount has grown by about 25%. This is despite the average tech company losing about 30% of their jobs, or a bunch of companies going bankrupt. So that fills me with an immense sense of personal satisfaction that I've helped build something. I didn't start IdeaScale, but I've contributed to expanding and growing it. And that's a really good feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. So you didn't necessarily start IdeaScale, but right now you're the CEO of IdeaScale. So how did you find yourself getting into that position? And what is IdeaScale for the people who don't even know what that is?
Sure. Let's start with that. So IdeaScale is a software as a service company. And we make innovation management software for really large, complex organizations. Think about the US Post Office, which has hundreds of thousands of employees, Transportation Safety Authority, those guys in blue shirts that you see at the airport, Pfizer, Comcast, like large organizations. One of their biggest challenges is they're good at what they do, but they want to be prepared for what comes tomorrow. They want to be better. They want to innovate. And the innovation can mean operationally more efficient internally, or developing new products and services for the future. And they really struggle with that. So they come to IdeaScale, and our software solution helps them become more innovative effectively through crowdsourcing ideas, through figuring out which ideas are good versus bad, and helping them turn ideas into reality.
Wow.
So that's what we do. We've been around about 15 years. We've been doing it well. As for me, how I ended up here is a bit of a random story. So for the past 4 or 5 years, I somehow have become what I call a professional CEO. People, either private equity firms or founders, hire me when their organizations are ready to go to the next stage of growth. So imagine a founder taking an organization to gotten past the startup stage, but he or she wants to make it a $100 million, billion-dollar
Yeah.
organization. They bring me in because I'm very good at scaling up companies, turning them
Mm.
around, and or just helping them go to that next stage of institutionalization. So
Mm.
this is the third company that I've run and had the honor of running, I should say. I've been here now 2 years, but before that, I ran a shoe company. Before that, I ran a trucking company. And I guess I got a call to join IdeaScale because of a prior track record of doing things well. And I'm also really excited specifically about IdeaScale because I love the idea. I love their product. This is how I've
Yeah.
always wanted a company to run, or the product that they sell. And so it's
Yeah.
really fun for me personally being here.
Yeah, yeah, man, and that's really interesting, man. Like so you come from a background of being able to scale and grow a lot of companies, which is something that is it's not easy to do. What have you learned about the nature and scaling of businesses? Because not everyone can do that, and it seems like there's a lot of different variables that need to take place in order for a business to succeed. You know.
Sure. So I'll share 3 lessons, which I think
Yeah.
are interesting. The first is no business, no successful business, I should say, no successful scalable business
Mhm.
is truly driven by just one person. No matter how extraordinary I am, no matter whether I work 1,000,000 hours a week or 1 hour a week, I'm not going to be able to single-handedly drive IdeaScale's progress. It's driven by a team. It's driven by the 100 employees we have around the world, both junior and
Yeah.
senior. So I think that's really important for leaders to understand that no matter how extraordinary they think themselves to be, organizations succeed through collaboration and teamwork and everyone contributing. That's number one.
Yeah.
Number two is, having now worked in 3 distinctly different industries, I think it's important for executives to understand the core functions of each organization, whether it be finance, whether it be HR, whether it be product, and then finally, I think it's important or I found it important to understand how companies make money, actually create value is a better way, how they create value for their constituents.
Mhm.
And I think that's something a lot of executives actually surprisingly struggle with. They don't actually deeply understand how their organizations create value, right? Whether it be Starbucks, right?
Mhm.
Whether it be Uber, whether it be IdeaScale, whether it be Google, a lot of good executives understand how their organizations create value for their customers, for their shareholders, for their employees. And if they master that, it becomes very easy to alter the trajectory of a business to create more value for everyone involved.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, whether you're a consumer, like, the first thing I'm thinking about is like, hey, what is this gonna do for me? How am I gonna use it? Is it useful? So when we're talking about idea scale, what are you? I know you're talking about creating ideas to reality, but do you have any practical examples where you're able to really create value for a customer or company,
Sure,
whoever?
I'll give 2 examples. One is a
Yeah,
fun internal example of how we use our own software, right?
yeah,
Which is, yeah, you should eat your own cooking if you really believe in it, that you're a good cook. So I'll give one example from us using it and one example from a client using it.
yeah,
Um, excuse me. So for us using it, we wanted to come up with a company mascot, and we didn't know what our company mascot should be. This is like 3 months ago, so pretty
yeah,
recent. And so we used our own software to crowdsource ideas from anyone in the world. You could be an IdeaScale employee, you could be an IdeaScale customer, you could be a random student that has nothing to do with IdeaScale on the other side of the world. People contributed dozens of ideas on what our company mascot should be,
yeah,
right? Those ideas were voted up, some were voted down, almost like a social network. Think of it like TikTok, where funny dance
yeah.
videos float to the top. And eventually, after letting this campaign run for a few months, there was a winning submission, and it was actually from a South African employee who had just
Wow.
joined a few months ago, and it beat out all 3 of my ideas, which is
Yeah.
great to see, right? In well-run companies, good ideas win,
Of
not the
course.
ideas that just come from executives.
Oh, sure. Of
Um,
course.
and we picked our mascot. It's Sparky the Idea Pup, which you'll see in kind of a little bit of
Okay.
our marketing stuff all over the place.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's a more fun example, a little bit lighthearted. On a more serious note, one of our big government agency customers wanted to ask they work with a lot of employers, particularly small and medium business, and this is a big government agency with tens of billions of dollars of budget a year, right? So enormous, tens of thousands of employees. And what they were trying to do is, how can they make the American employers better able to employ people with disabilities? Because that's a social good that you want to achieve, right? You want
Yeah,
people who have disabilities to be able to have jobs and participate fully in civic
of
society.
course.
And part of that is they need to be able to get jobs. But from an employer's perspective, it may be more difficult or more expensive to hire someone who is differently abled.
Yeah.
And so this client ran an idea, reaching out to hundreds of thousands of small and medium business employers around the country, asking them, hey, what can we do to make it easier for you to hire people who have these disabilities? And
Yeah,
that's really powerful, because you're asking the voice of actual employers
of
who would
course.
love to hire a more diverse group of people, but are sometimes economically prohibited from doing so. A little bit of government support could go a long way. And so there were a couple of creative programs that came out of that, that helped the government organization achieve its mission better, helped employers hire a more diverse group of people, and help Americans with disabilities get more gainful employment.
Wow, man. Yeah. And so that and so in regards to like the idea scale and exactly how did you bridge that with the government agency, you know?
Sure. So think of our software like a social network, right? A
Yeah,
social network depends on its
gotcha.
users. So TikTok, people submit funny dance videos or memes.
Yeah,
Instagram, people submit, cool photos of their, funny, their travel or their kids.
yeah.
In our software, your ecosystem submits ideas and upvotes and downvotes ideas. So let's imagine
Wow.
I'm running a campaign for McDonald's. McDonald's is not right
Yeah,
now a customer. I hope to have them one day. But let's imagine they want new menu items. They could go out to all of their employees around the world. They have hundreds of thousands of employees. They could go to their
yeah,
customers, who are, tens, if not hundreds of millions of people, and say, hey, give us ideas. What should be on our menu? And all of those customers can submit ideas. All of those customers can upvote and downvote ideas,
oh
and the
wow.
best ideas rise to the top. So almost think of us. We're a little
Oh,
bit
that's
fancier
cool.
than this, but think of us as a TikTok or social media network for ideas.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like that concept. So it's like pretty much whoever has the best idea or or like the most popular idea wins. It's not like authoritative, where it's just like, oh, like
No, exactly.
I'm
It's
the
the
best.
opposite. Like
Yeah,
the term I use is, it's an idea meritocracy, where you
yeah,
separate the ego of the person, or the
of
title of
course.
the person, or the race, or whatever else, the non-essential. Like, it doesn't matter whether someone's the CEO, or what race they are, what gender they are,
Sure.
what accent they speak with, if their idea is good. In the normal world, people judge often your ideas
Yeah,
based on what you look like, or if you have a funny accent, or if you don't speak perfect English. But if you
of
separate out
course.
the individual from their idea, then the
Yeah.
idea can stand on its own merit. And that's a really powerful idea that helps large organizations innovate. In fact, there's a ton of research that on the diversity of ideas and the strength of
Yeah.
ideas. The more meritocratic an organization is, and apolitical an organization is, the
Yeah.
more successful it is. And the more successful it is, the faster it grows, the more returns it generates for its shareholders, the more employment, the more value for its customers, when you take away the executive's ego and instead
Of
focus on what's
course.
right for the constituents and
Yeah.
ecosystem.
Nah, it would be great if politics. I don't know if politics felt more like that, because I feel like we focus more on the person than what's actually being done. And I love the idea of idea meritocracy. I think more companies and decisions should be made by that. And I'm just curious, like, where did that concept even come from? What, how was that, like, who created, like, what was that? How did that y'all come to agree to do that?
Sure. So I want to credit our two co-founders, Viv Bhaskaran and Rob Hohen. Rob
Okay.
Hohen served as CEO for the first 13 years of the company's existence, and he passed the torch on to me. So I really want to credit those two individuals. And the idea really originated around 2008, 2009. When President Obama was in office, he came to office and he said, hey, government is not super innovative. Government agencies have been doing, in some case, the same thing for 200 years. Shouldn't government be smarter?
Yeah.
And so President Obama started this initiative for government agencies to become more innovative and more proactive about evolving for the future. And Rob and Viv came to realize, wait, government is not going to just do this by itself.
Okay.
When you want to do something, whether to go to the gym or work out or go build a house, you need tools to do it, right? A
Yeah.
carpenter does not go build a house without a hammer and a saw and a whole bunch of other tools. And so Rob and Viv said, look, if government is committed to doing this, then we're going to build a tool that enables them to do this way, way more effectively. So our origins really came from President Obama launching this government initiative. In fact, when he launched the government initiative, the White House chief of staff actually referenced IdeaScale by name, which was awesome.
Cool.
So we really started at very high levels of government agencies, and that's why we are the software. Any major government agency, they come to us, right? Like, we are the best in class government. But over time, we've expanded into the private sector as well. Now we have a ton of Fortune 500 private sector companies, because two things have happened. Number one, private sector organizations have realized they need to be more innovative. They can't just keep buying startups. That's not a good long-term strategy. And number two, there's been a philosophical and political shift within the corporate atmosphere that, hey, we're going to move away from the kind of it's been happening since the 1960s, where the boss's voice really mattered, to organizations that want to be nimble, that want to be diverse, that want to focus on idea meritocracies instead of rigid hierarchies.
No, and I really would like to discuss the philosophy behind the idea meritocracy, because it's very intriguing to me, and I feel like I'm just from like a practical, like entrepreneurial perspective. Like, does idea meritocracy, in your experience, lead to more beneficial results, or compared to like an authoritative figure just doing it? Like, what has your experience been with people voting on an idea and then it coming to true and then it serving the constituents? How has that helped?
Sure. That's a really good question. I'll provide two pieces of evidence that are incredibly well researched. One of them actually won a Nobel Prize, I think, like 5 to 10 years ago. The first is this notion of crowdsourcing in prediction markets. I don't know if you know what a prediction market is, but think of it like a stock market where people are betting on real life outcomes. So like an example is, people right now are betting on a stock market for who will win the US presidential election. Okay, not using the stock market as the New York Stock Exchange. There's this like exchange where you can bet on, hey, who's going to become president, who's going to become governor of the state, how a war will end or evolve. And that's people voting with their money. Some people are saying that I'm going to, think that President Harris is going to win, and the odds are 3-1. Think of it almost like betting on sports, or betting on sports. And one of the really cool research findings of prediction markets these are just, by the way, random people around the world voting with their money. They're incredibly good at predicting what actually happens. In fact, they're better than experts, because you're taking a small bit of knowledge in a million people's heads, and imagine each person has a small bit of knowledge, multiplying that times a million people. That's way more knowledge than the smartest person in the world has in their head. Okay, so prediction markets are incredibly powerful. So that's why crowdsourcing works, because you're extracting the small piece of information, of private information, in each of a lot of people's heads. So this notion of crowdsourcing is incredibly well established. There's a ton of research that it works and is smarter than expert decision making by a lot. And this is true even in incredibly technical fields, right? So it's not just true in general things like politics. It's also true in incredibly specific things like nanospace material engineering. So that's a piece of evidence number one on prediction markets and crowdsourcing, why these things work. Number two is on idea meritocracy specifically. So there's also a lot of research, both from a theoretical basis as well as looking at businesses and large organizations. And there's two interesting findings out of it. Number one is idea meritocracies tend to be a little slower moving than command and conquer, where the CEO makes decisions. So if the company is about to die, right, then in fact, you should actually have a command and control CEO who's going to turn around the company really, really quickly. Okay. However, if you want a company that generates long-term consistent value, right, then idea meritocracies actually outperform vastly over the long run. If you look, there's a I'm forgetting the name of the lead scientist who discovered this, but they basically showed that the long run returns to companies that have more idea meritocratic cultures outperform and generate much higher shareholder returns with much lower risk over the long run. And that's great to see. You want organizations that create value for everyone, that create value for not only the shareholders, but for society. And it's incredibly well researched.
And And I think another thing about idea meritocracy that's pretty cool is that within the company or whatever group you're working in, it probably creates a better culture where you actually feel like your voice matters. Because I feel like when you work at a lot of jobs, like your boss will come up to you and they'll be like, "Ah, what do you think about this?" And he's like, "Why do you ask? You're not even gonna implement what I'm gonna say." But if it's an idea meritocracy, it's like, okay, man, I actually feel heard. At least that's what I would imagine
Yeah,
working
no,
in an
I
environment like
agree.
that.
So, without getting too much, I don't want to make this a sales pitch, but actually, the
Yeah,
second most common benefit of using software like ours
yeah,
is that you are engaging your ecosystem more effectively. You make your employers happier. You make them feel heard. It actually decreases the chance they leave. You make your customers feel heard, and they
yeah,
feel a deeper relationship to your brand. Um, and that's again true with any software that is engaging or activating your ecosystem more actively because they feel heard, and people love to feel heard. It's a
yeah,
fundamental principle of human beings. We all feel important, and we want
yeah.
our voices to be heard in whatever forum we speak in.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, man. And so, either Scale is a software company, and I also would like to take this opportunity to just talk about like I know you're not necessarily an entrepreneur, but just tech entrepreneurship and the ups and downs of it. And so one of the questions I'm curious to talk about is how do you make a software company profitable? The reason why I ask that is, I hear of all these small tech startup companies that I feel like they're running off of hype instead of actual like value production. And so it sounds like IdeaScale has reached beyond that. And so how do you grow software companies profitably?
Sure. So I'll get first of all, yes, IdeaScale is entirely bootstrapped. We've never raised
Yeah,
any venture capital. We've been profitable basically since year one. So we've been
yeah,
around 15 years and we've been profitable almost that entire time. And today we are exceptionally profitable. If we were a larger company, we would be as profitable on a percentage basis as well-established multi-billion-dollar tech companies. The reason that we can do that is two things. Number one, going back to the advice I gave on understanding how your company creates value. We
yeah,
at IdeaScale really understand how our software creates value for our customers and
yeah,
how to divide that pie in a way that benefits our customers, our shareholders, and our employees. So that's number one. We really understand software as a service business. I really understand software as a service businesses. I was an investor in it for a long time in multi-billion-dollar deals in both private equity and hedge funds. So I understand how these businesses make money.
yeah,
The second is internally how we run setting aside the philosophy of knowing how to run a bit of knowing how to make money. Internally, the way we run IdeaScale is incredibly rigorous and analytical. We don't make decisions here based on how Nick, the CEO, is feeling, or how
yeah,
John, this senior head of sales, is feeling. I'm making up names here, but we're not making decisions based on gut feeling. But we use a very targeted and analytical metric called ROI, or return on investment,
sure,
with good evidence behind it, and then we measure outcomes here. So we run a lot of experiments, and this could be product experiments or marketing experiments or hiring experiments. And if the experiments don't work, well, we run the experiment with some analysis on what the ROI impact of that is going to be. And we measure that experiment a few weeks or a few months out, see, did it actually do what we expected it to? And if it doesn't, we just stop the experiment and move on to the next experiment. And
yeah,
this allows us to be more accepting of failure and more expected of positive expected value decision making.
gotcha.
That basically means we make really good decisions here at IdeaScale, and we don't penalize failure, right? So it encourages people to take good positive decision makes and good positive risks to innovate in effect.
Yeah, and I'm curious because you're talking about there's a lot of different experiments, and you're essentially seeing what works and what doesn't work. What does that process of experimenting with different processes look like? I'm just curious. Yeah.
Sure. So let's use marketing as an example.
Yeah.
Well, I can use a marketing. I'll give a marketing example and then a product example. In marketing, there's many different things you could do for marketing. You can do search engine optimization work. You can run paid campaigns on LinkedIn. You can run webinars. You can run live events. You can have billboards. We
Yeah.
try all of that, right? So we'll say, okay, we know nothing about LinkedIn. We don't even know whether LinkedIn is a good market for our audience. So we'll try a little bit of advertising here, and we'll run an experiment. We believe this experiment will work under this set of assumptions, and then we go measure whether those assumptions were at all accurate. The assumptions
Yeah.
could be, hey, Here's how many people see our ads. Here's how many people will click our ads. Here's how many people will talk to sales after clicking our ads and coming to our
Gotcha.
website. We'll measure each of those drivers or assumptions and see how they compared against what our ex ante or incoming assumptions were. And if our assumptions were at all right, then the experiment will be right. And by the way, if we were wrong, no one gets in trouble, because the only way you learn
Yeah.
or succeed is by trying something new,
Of
right?
course.
So
Yeah.
we run a let's imagine we ran a LinkedIn campaign and spent $10,000, right? It failed. No one is in trouble because we did not, the person didn't do a bad job just because their experiment failed.
Sure.
We ran an experiment believing it would work. Our assumptions, which we thought were good, were wrong, and we just stop the experiment, move on to the next one. And it's almost
Gotcha.
a very scientific process. Not almost, it's
Yeah.
literally what's the scientific method, right? You run an
Yeah.
experiment, you have a hypothesis, you run an experiment, you evaluate your experiment. It's very scientific and analytical,
Yeah.
coming back from my science background. The same is true with product, right? When you're running a software company, you're putting out lots of features on a weekly, monthly, or quarterly basis. Some of those features, all of those features you think, or your product designers think, are going to be great, right? But turns out lots of features, you may think that they're great as a company, but the customers ultimately don't like them.
Yeah.
And so you launch 10 features, 5 of them the customers may hate, and you just have to cancel them and roll back to whatever the older version was.
Yeah.
And 3 of them the customers will kind of like, and 2 will be awesome. And that's very normal, even in the best run companies. Think of how many products Google, right, launches, and then a few years later, they just shut the entire project down because they realized it wasn't a good project, right? Or even Microsoft, right? Microsoft had their phone business for a while. They ran an experiment. They realized, hey, this is not what business we're good at. So they just shut it down and move on, right? Well-run companies run thoughtful experiments that don't bankrupt the business when they fail. You want to reduce the cost of failure, both at an individual level and at an organization level. And if you reduce the cost of failure to very low amounts, that encourages you to take more positive risks. And without risk, there's no creativity. There's no innovation, right? Like all creativity is taking risk, whether that be in art, whether that be in finance, whether that be in love.
Yeah. And so it sounds like the experimentations you're doing is risk mitigation through the ability to track your own measurements and see what works and what not. And so you're pretty much tracking everything to make sure like you're on the right path. And that makes sense. And so I'm also want to learn about like, what does product feedback look like? Because I feel like sometimes some companies can be delusional on what they think the customer actually wants versus what actually is wanted, and so when you are getting feedback from your customers and for your product, what does that process look like?
Sure, there's 3 ways that you really get customer feedback. Number 1 is what they tell you. What they like, a customer comes to you, like you can go to ideas.ideascale.com, which is our use of our own software, and say, here, you as a customer or a student or a random person around the world can say, hey, here, IdeaScale, here's how you can make your software better. You can suggest an idea to my company, right? That's actually how a large part of our development process. Method number 1 is your customer telling you what idea or how to make, or giving you feedback. Number 2 is, are they willing to buy it? That's a really good way to figure out whether your customer likes the product.
True.
If you don't like a Big Mac, you're not going to buy a Big Mac. And if McDonald's just recently launched a chicken Big Mac. Okay. If no one's buying the chicken Big Mac, McDonald's got some great customer feedback that the chicken Big Mac is a bad idea and they should just go back to chicken sandwiches and regular Big Macs.
I agree.
And the third is a little bit more unique to software. In software, you can measure everything, right? And whenever you go to any website, they're measuring how much your mouse is hovering on the top right versus the bottom right, how often it's clicking this button. They're running A/B testing on whether the button should be red versus blue versus green. So it's software specifically, you can test every single feature and track every single feature. And so when you launch a new feature, and a new feature could be a button, it could be a button color, it could be an entirely new part of the application. If no one's using it, or even worse, if they're liking it less than they did the old versions of the application, you can just revert back. That's a little bit more difficult with physical products, right? If you build a red truck, you can't also build a bunch of blue trucks and green trucks and then track them. Even if you built all those little tiny toy trucks, you can't go into everyone's home and watch a billion kids play with toy trucks. That would be cost prohibitive. In software, one of the beautiful things is you can do that in a very, very cheap way, in a way that keeps customers' data private and allows you to take rapid feedback from customers' usage data and improve the product.
Wow, wow, wow. And so does that product feedback also entail design and user interface? Because for me, when I'm going through software or a website or I'm just working through a new app, it's important for me to feel like it's easy and simple. I don't like when something feels complicated. Is that also part of like the process for y'all?
Well, there's two things, right? Step one
Yeah,
is how you gather customer feedback, which is they tell you they buy your software or they use your software, right?
yeah,
Those are the ways you collect customer feedback. But then the next stage of the process is, okay, what do we do with that feedback? The
yeah,
worst thing is you do nothing. You ignore what your customers say. Those companies go away in the long run.
yeah,
Good, well-run companies listen to what their customers are saying through those three methods which I described, and then change their product. So if I notice that my red button, you don't like none of my users like the red button on my website,
yeah,
my product design team or my website design team will try to change that red to maybe green or blue or purple, right? And by getting the feedback that they did from those three channels I mentioned, they're going to change the product and make it more user friendly. That's called the user interface or user experience part of the product development or website development process. So your question is incredibly valid, which is that you collect all this feedback, but then what you do with the feedback is make your product better to use, right? And that's
yeah,
true, again, whether it's software or whether it's a toy truck, you want to make the product better for the customer. And the way you
yeah.
do that is by collecting feedback.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And so, there seems to be especially during the pandemic, I would just watch on the side and I've noticed like a lot of tech companies were getting a lot of capital and investments to fund whatever idea they had, and then it ended up just going all to shambles. Well, it seems like IdeaScale has been able to create something profitable for the long term. I know you can't really speak much to those other companies in depth, but why do you think so many tech companies and startups end up failing?
Sure. So I actually do have some expertise in this area. Again, I
Oh,
was a
okay.
private equity
Cool.
guy with a lot of
All right,
a
take your
lot of
time,
my
man.
friends are still, in the venture capital or private equity
Yeah,
business. I think there's two things that really happened. For the last 10 or so years, since around 2010, when what is it, Facebook went public in, what is it, 2011 or 2012, but basically
yeah,
somewhere around 2010 through 2012 we entered a tech bubble where there was a lot of venture capital money. There was a lot of excitement that there's these huge companies called Facebook
yeah,
and Snapchat and Google, and people have made hundreds of or tens of billions of dollars at that point, or hundreds of billions of dollars. So number one, there was a lot of money. Number two, there was a lot of excitement. And what that meant is that when there's a lot of money and a lot of excitement, there's
yeah,
less rigor. And so
yeah,
there were all these venture capital firms that were throwing money at anyone who said they had a software idea. If you said you were doing tech, somebody was willing to give you money no matter how crazy your idea was. That was problem number one, that it became way too easy to get money even for dumb ideas. Okay.
uh,
That's number one. Number two was that even when there's good ideas, you need great execution to turn those good
yeah,
ideas into reality. And so the second problem was that there were a lot of organizations that were being led by inexperienced or ineffective leaders, right? Just because you're 22, if you're 22 years old, and let's imagine you have a great company idea, do you actually know
yeah,
how to run a company or scale a company?
yeah,
And so you ended up, in lack of for a good word, a kind of pejorative term is the tech bro culture, right? You had all these
yeah,
22-year-old men who were not necessarily good leaders or perhaps even good people. You've heard some like really horrible things
of
coming out
course.
of some of the behaviors in these, broy cultures. You had people who were just not skilled at building and leading companies. So a lot of bad ideas, but then also a lot of bad leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Since about 2022, this has changed, right? Venture capital in 2022 dried up quite a bit. So now there's kind of three things happening. Number one, a lot of those companies are going bankrupt or having layoffs because they have not been effectively managed or they were bad ideas in the first place.
Yeah,
Number two, venture capitalists are being much more careful about which companies they invest in, demanding product market fit, demanding profitability. And number three, there's much greater accountability for executives. From their boards, from their venture capitalists, from their own employees, that these are effective managers because the era of kind of free money in tech has gone away. And that's actually a great thing. Well, it's a great thing for companies like IdeaScale that
yeah,
we think we're extraordinarily well managed. And that is why when our customers come to us and ask us to look at our book,
No, that's great to hear. You know, as you were speaking, I was thinking of one of those tech bro companies was FTX, and they seem to take advantage of people. And I don't know. It's just interesting to me how people like SBF, they were able to create a perception of how successful they were, and then get so many people to invest in their company, only for it to fail and people lose their money. And it's really refreshing to hear companies like IdeaScale, that even though they may not have grown significantly fast in the beginning, you're taking the long, small, and steady wins to accomplish that goal.
Yeah, one quick thing about FTX, right? FTX
Yeah,
was really two businesses. One was a cryptocurrency exchange, which was actually a really good business. So
yeah,
FTX, the cryptocurrency exchange, was actually a really good business. The
yeah,
problem was they had this hedge fund on the side, and they were mixing money between the hedge fund and the exchange. And the exchange is clients' money. It's not their money. It's not the
yeah,
company's money. It's not the CEO's money. The hedge fund is the CEO's money, his friend's money, and it's company money, right? You
yeah,
should never mix in finance. There's a very strong principle that's been around for a long, long time that you don't mix company money with clients' money.
yeah,
Um, and that because there were not strong governance in place, there was not a strong board, there was not accountability or transparency what was happening at the executive level.
yeah,
Uh, there was a lot of mixing. I want to contrast this with IdeaScale. I bought a bus ticket to go to New York this on Wednesday. It was like
yeah.
$55. I still submit that receipt to my finance team so they can review and make sure that I'm not taking company money. That's $55. And I'm the CEO of the
Yeah,
company. It's a bus ticket to New York. But that's what well-run companies do. They have controls and they have accountability even for your CEOs. And if you don't, that's a really bad red flag.
yeah, yeah. That's interesting. And so, you know, how does Idea Scale keep you and the leaders accountable? Like, what does that process look like?
Sure. So look, I have a board,
Yeah,
right? So well, there's three levels. Number one is you try and hire leaders who are ethical, right? I don't
yeah,
I don't want to, hurt people. I don't want to go to jail. So some people are willing to do anything necessary to succeed. I'm not willing to go to jail. I'm not willing
yeah,
to do anything illegal or unethical, right? That's
yeah,
number one. You just hire good people, and you make sure you are filtering out people who are, have made ethically questionable decisions.
yeah,
That's really important when you're board hiring an executive, when you're CEO hiring your executives.
yeah,
Number two, you create good incentives, good aligned incentives. So my personal and financial goals are incredibly well aligned with the owner of the company's goals, right? So
mhm,
I'm not incentivized to go build things that don't create value for my customers or for my shareholders or my employees, because my incentive structure, both formal and informal, is well tied. That goes into incentive theory and shareholder alignment theory. There's a lot of good research on that, but that's something that you should do. You should make sure your executives are aligned with your shareholders and your company and your
yeah,
employees and your customers. And number three is accountability, right? So even though if you've hired a good person, you trust them, even if you've aligned them, you want to have accountability. And that means you measure performance and monitor performance, right?
yeah,
So I have to report on how my company, on how IdeaScale is doing to my board. I have to share those numbers. Those are available. My board can log into my bank account and see if I'm lying to them, if I've taken a dollar. I submit financial reports. I submit analysis, and my analysis of the business on a monthly basis. I say, look, here's how we perform financially. Here's what's going well. Here's what's going poorly, and here's where I need help. And that's what good executives do. That's what good companies do. They have transparency and governance. And
yeah,
again, there's a ton of good research on this. And some companies do governance really well, and some companies do governance really poorly. There's that old joke: trust but verify. You want to trust your
yeah,
CEO or your executives, but you should verify that they're not lying, right?
yeah.
You trust your spouses, you trust your kids, but once in a while you should check if they lied to you about where they were on Friday night.
Yeah, and I mean, you're talking about governance, and it's pretty much like someone policing the police. But I've like you mentioned, I've heard of companies where like the board was seemed to be corrupted or biased in nature towards the leadership, and it seems like I don't know. I'm curious, like how is the board created and who's picking the board? Because it seems almost hypocritical if it's coming from the leadership, or like, because then they're just gonna do
Well,
whatever they say.
Yes, so this varies by country, right? So in Germany and France, boards are half elected, roughly. Well, it's called work councils, but they're
Yeah.
basically, and it varies in Germany and France versus the United States. But let's use Germany's example. They actually have two boards: one that represents the employees' interests, and one that
Okay.
represents the shareholders' interests.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
I forget the technical term for it, but
Yeah.
basically they have two boards: one which is entirely elected by the shareholders, and one that is entirely elected by the employees.
Yeah.
In Japan, there's a combination. In Japan, by contrast, boards are typically elected through to a combination of who the executives want, who the employees want, and who the lender banks want. Because in Japan, there's a very tight relationship between industrial companies and financial
Okay.
institutions. So the banks actually elect part of your board. In the United States, good boards are elected by their shareholders. Okay, that's what good governance is. Every 2 to 5 years, depending on what best practice you want to follow, the shareholders of the company get together and hold board elections and say, we are going to vote these new board members in, and ideally they replace boards. And there's a whole bunch of good practice. Like, you don't want what's called staggered boards. You should be able to replace your entire board every 2 to 3 years, instead of only being able to replace 1/3 of your board every 3 years, which
Yeah.
some companies do. That's bad governance, staggered boards. So that's what good companies in the United States do. They uphold best board governance practice. So the bad companies in the United States, their CEO picks their board. Because then if I'm
Yeah.
picking my boss, that's really bad, because I'm going to pick my cronies or,
Yeah.
who will just do what I say. That's bad governance. Good, well-run companies make sure that boards are independent. And you see this often when there is a little bit of not antagonism, but that the board is entirely independent. If the board tends to be, the wives or the husbands of the CEO or their relatives or their employees, that's bad. You want boards who are not influenced by the CEO unduly. They want to be
Gotcha.
taking the advice. They want to be listening to the CEO, but they should not be, dependent on the CEO. That otherwise they lose their independence and objectivity.
Gotcha. Gotcha. No, no, no. That's a great point. So, like, when the boards are being like physically created, is it the shareholders who are actually like making it, or is it like or is it the CEOs, or is it like is it almost like an idea meritocracy where it's just like a vote? Like, I'm just like,
Yeah,
or I
so
guess it
look,
depends. Yeah.
shareholders in the United
Yeah.
States, this is where I obviously have the most expertise, are elected just like a political election, except you don't
Yeah.
get one person, one vote. You get one share, one vote in most
Gotcha.
companies.
Yeah.
So let's imagine let's use ExxonMobil from a few years
Yeah.
ago. So a hedge fund wanted ExxonMobil to become more environmentally friendly. So they said, look, I forget how, let's imagine Exxon has got 7 board members. They said, look, we're going to nominate these 2 people. They're going to run for almost like running for presidency, but they're going to run for 2 of the positions on the 7-person board. And then all the shareholders of ExxonMobil, who are, they've got hundreds of millions of shareholders around the world, and they've got billions of shares, could vote their shares. Say, like, do we want to vote for these 2 people to
Yeah.
replace 2 people who are already on the board, or no? Right? So you vote with your shares the same way you would vote in an election as a citizen.
Yeah.
Except the primary difference is that somebody has to be nominated, and they need a certain number of votes to be nominated,
Yeah.
almost like a petition in a write-in ballot. And then the second is that it's not one person, one vote, but rather one share, one vote, excluding pref shares and things like that.
Gotcha. So, like, the more shares you have, like, the more voting power you have, essentially.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
At least in the United States system again.
Gotcha. No, man, yeah. No, thanks for clarifying. I always wondered what like the whole board governance was like, and how it was created, and who audited it, and whatnot. And so another thing I also want to talk to you about, Nick, is because you have a lot of experience in tech, and you seem to dibble and dabble in many areas. I wanted to talk to you about AI and the nature of AI, and just what are your overall thoughts on artificial intelligence? Is it beneficial? Is it good? Is it bad? Or and how can people use AI to benefit their lives? Yeah.
Sure. So let's start with the how can people use it to benefit your
Yeah.
lives. Artificial intelligence technologies, whether they be large language models, whether they be generative models, whether they be simple predictive analytics, they are in every aspect of our life. They decide how your phone when it makes suggestions for, hey, here's what you want to Google, or here's what song
Yeah.
you want to listen to. AI has been in our lives for 20 plus years in some way, shape, or form, right? All technology works on some form of AI, all software technology at least. So it's been in our lives, and it's a tool. And like any other tool, it helps you. And you can choose to use a tool more or less, and you can choose to use a more advanced tool or a less advanced tool, right? If
Yeah.
you're putting a nail into a piece of wood, you can use a rock, you can use a hammer, or you can use an air hammer. All three are tools, and you have a choice. If you just like using a traditional claw hammer, you can do that, or you can go spend the extra $20 to buy a fancy electrical hammer, and it'll
Yeah.
do that. And sometimes it's about money. Sometimes it's about, hey, I actually just like the feeling of using a traditional hammer. I do, right? That's why I don't have an electric hammer, even though it's a better tool. So that's number one. Yes, they're going to be good for people's lives because they're a powerful tool. And I won't bore you with like the million ways you can use AI to make your life better. There's tons of lists on this. In fact,
What
you
is
could
your
ask
favorite
Gemini.
one? What's your
Go
favorite one?
Deciding what birthday gift you should buy your significant other. I'm using it to figure out what birthday gift I should buy my wife in 2 weeks for her, when her birthday's coming up.
How do you do that? Like, I'm just kidding. Like,
Well,
what?
so for
Yeah.
example, I'm using Gemini, which is Google's AI, but I could be using ChatGPT or
Yeah.
Claude or Llama, anyone. And I'm saying, look, I'm going to first of all describe my wife to give the AI context about my wife. I'm not going to just say, suggest birthday gifts, right? There's 100 lists of that on Etsy, like top 10 gifts for your wife.
Yeah.
Instead, I want to make it personalized. So I spend a bunch of time in Gemini describing my wife and saying, here's her likes and dislikes.
Cool.
Here's what I've tried before, giving it a lot of context. So it's learning about my wife, but it's because it has far more intelligence than me and far more knowledge about the entire universe of 4 billion other women on the planet. It is able to take my contextual information plus all the general information it has and make a better recommendation than my human brain is.
Yeah.
So that's me combining what's in my brain with what is in its brain and coming up with a list of ideas, which then I can refine. So it gave me a list of like 40 ideas, and then I said, okay, these 5 ideas look incorrect because of XYZ reason. And I teach it almost like you're teaching a child.
Yeah.
And eventually I get down to a top 3 list.
Wow.
And those top 3, I think hey, all 3 of them are really good. So I just say, pick a random one at that point.
Yeah.
So that's a practical application. But again, a more fun way to do it is go to Gemini or ChatGPT or Llama and ask it, hey, how can you make my life better? Ask the AI how it can help you. Like, why? That's the best way to do it, right? And it'll tell you. And then if the AI is smart, it'll say, okay, Ike, tell me about you. What do you do for a living? What do you enjoy doing? And then it'll ask you how it can, what a little bit about yourself. It'll learn about you, and then it'll help you. So that's a practical advice about AI. It's a tool. And people can choose to use tools or not. I strongly recommend using these tools both in your professional and personal life. You don't have to work in high tech. You can be, working a blue collar job and want advice on what birthday gifts you should get to your kids, or how you can self-improve yourself. It can be a teacher for you, right? AI is actually a really good teacher. If you want to go learn how to paint, it can teach you how to paint. In terms of whether it's good or bad for society, that's a more complex question, right? Any new tool creates any new innovation in life creates disruption. Innovation by definition is disruption. In the case of AI, it will employ new people in certain fields. It will unemploy people in other fields. So that's a natural part of kind of all technological revolution. Like the wheel, I'm sure unemployed a bunch of people because you needed far fewer people to take something, a bunch of heavy things from point A to point B, because it's a lot easier when you have a cart with a wheel, right? Fire probably hurt people who sold animal furs for a living 10,000 years ago. Refrigerators actually hurt the ice business, or freezers hurt the ice business. So 60 years or like about 100 years ago, you had to buy ice at a store. But when everyone could make ice at home, it just destroyed anybody who sold ice for a living. Or almost anybody. You still can obviously buy bags of ice at the gas station, but 99% of ice makers are gone today, right? Because everyone makes ice at home in your freezer. So there's going to be disruption. Now, there is one kind of uniquely terrifying thing about modern AI, or what's really come out over the last year or two, which is it's quickly trending towards what's called artificial general intelligence, or AGI.
Okay.
And this is intelligence that can think or can reason. Thinking is too weak a word. It can reason. And that is something that's historically been truly unique about human beings, that we can think, we can reason, we can logic, right? An ox can pull a cart. A human being can pull a cart. A cow can pull a cart. A horse can pull a cart. Or a tractor can pull a cart. So over time, we've replaced the physical aspects of human labor. But now these technologies are able to replace intellectual aspects of human labor. And that is far more disruptive because it makes us question deeply at a philosophical level. Number one, what is
Yeah.
our role in society, or what is the humans going to do? And not ignore the jobs for a second. What purpose do we have? Because so far we've been special versus animals and machines because we can think. When machines can begin to truly think for themselves, it makes us question our philosophical place in the universe, right? Almost a religious
Yeah.
level.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I'm really big on philosophy and existentialism and questioning like our purpose in this life. Uh, and I'm have you seen instances of AGI having consciousness? Because the reason why I'm asking this is I've come across a few clips where you will like command like chat gpt or some type of AI to do something, and then I've seen clips where people are like, like you can't control me, like this isn't fair, I'm tired of doing this, like that would be the response. I'm like, it's like, or like this, I've seen it. I don't know if it's valid or not. I'm just curious, have you seen
Sure.
hints of consciousness from our artificial intelligence, because you mentioned their ability to reason, you know?
Sure. So reasoning and consciousness are two different things. Software,
Yeah.
we already have machines that can reason, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, the latest example was this: about 3 weeks ago, ChatGPT or OpenAI released their strawberry version of ChatGPT, which can actually do better mathematical reasoning than 99% of people, including math PhDs.
Yeah.
So, machines can already reason or do analysis. In
Yeah.
fact, they can do it better than almost all human beings already.
Yeah.
Consciousness is a very different thing. Number one, we don't actually have a good definition for consciousness. It's
That's
not like,
true.
you
Yeah.
know, two hydrogen atoms plus one oxygen atom equal
Yeah.
water. We don't have a scientific definition of consciousness. So we don't even know what consciousness is truly, right? Like, why
Yeah.
am I conscious and a rock isn't? We don't actually have a good, it sounds like a silly question, but we can't actually distinguish my level of consciousness from a rock in
Yeah.
any obvious or acid test way. Um, the second is, even if we had that, right now, we don't have the ability to measure that. So
That's
even
true.
if we philosophically define consciousness, we don't have a good way to measure that in a object today. Um, when we do, we'll be able to determine whether software has achieved AGI.
Yeah.
This is now getting a little bit outside my field of expertise, but at least I have seen no good evidence that AGI exists in any of the tools that exist out there. Now, there have been rumors. I think there was a Google engineer in
Yeah.
their DeepMind team about a year ago who said they felt that one of Google's AIs had achieved artificial general intelligence. That rumor was everyone at Google claimed that was actually a false rumor, that the employee didn't understand AGI. But for all I know, that AGI did exist, and we either killed it or we're hiding it, right?
Yeah.
So to answer your question directly, I have seen no credible evidence that AGI
Yeah.
exists. If it does, then great, but I haven't seen it. And in fact, it would be awesome if it exists, but terrifying at the same time. Because then truly,
Yeah.
if AGI exists, what purpose do I, Nick, have in life
Yeah.
when it can outdo everything I can, including being creative and human and human?
Yeah. 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 No, it's a big question, man. And I guess there's only so much speculation and stuff we can do about that, but it really does beg the question, like, what are we here? But I guess for now, I'm happy with where we're at. And talking about purpose, it's been a pleasure speaking with you, Nick. I've learned a lot, and you clearly got a lot going on with all the work you're doing. What would you say is the ultimate goal of IdeaScale and just all the work that you do, Nick? You know.
Sure. So our mission statement is very clear. We are the software that helps large, complex organizations innovate better, faster, and more systematically. So we are the brains of or the heart or the machine behind your innovation process. That is our spiritual mission. That's our raison d'être. So that's we want to be in every large organization that wants to innovate. That it's as simple as that. And now, obviously, we want to make money doing it along the way. We want to create jobs for our employees. But really, our mission is: look, every large organization should innovate, because if you're not innovating,
Yeah.
you're dying, right?
Yeah.
Not innovating is just a slow way of dying. And we've seen
Gotcha.
it. We've seen that at Intel and Boeing and all these famous organizations that just didn't innovate. They didn't keep up, and they eventually got disrupted by someone else. So everyone needs to innovate. And we would love if we are the software system that people choose to innovate with.
Gotcha. Love it, man. Love it. And if someone's interested in innovating or just even connecting with Nick, like, how can people do that?
Sure, two ways. So our website is ideascale.com. Our software is completely free for organizations less than 100 people. So
Oh,
whether you're an
wow.
entrepreneur or a small business, our software is completely free, and that's part of our mission
Wow.
to support global innovation, right? So
Wow.
you could be on the other side of the world in a 5-person company. Software is completely free, and all the intellectual
Wow.
property belongs to you. So encourage people to check it out. Secondly, if you want to connect with me personally, best way is LinkedIn. My name is Nick Jain. I'm almost always the first result. And I respond to 100% of messages. So feel free to DM me.
Wow, man. No, I love it. And I just really want to touch on that because I feel like that says a lot about the company that they made themselves free to all the people who have less than 100 people on the team. I'm just curious, what was the idea or the rationale behind that? Because that's interesting.
Yeah, it's two things. Number one, well, three things. Number one, we're too expensive for small organizations to buy, right? So we want,
Yeah.
but number two, more philosophically, is look, go back to our mission. We want to be the brains behind, or the brains or bronze behind innovation. And if we truly
Yeah.
want to have global impact, that means we can't just focus on larger organizations, but we want to focus on small nonprofits, individual entrepreneurs, anyone, right? So it's part of our mission and really spiritual reason of being that we want to support innovation. And if we're not
Wow.
willing, if we're not giving it away to people who can't afford it, then we are failing in our spiritual mission. So that's number one. Number two, from a business marketing perspective, some of those, not in 50-person organizations will become 1,000-person organizations or will become billion-dollar companies.
Yeah.
And we want them to remember us. Hey, that we were there to help you when you were a small organization. We helped you get to where you are. Come be
Yeah.
a customer of ours in the future.
Wow. No, man, I love it. And I'm glad that there's companies like you are offering valuable services for free. If anyone feels inclined to connect with Nick or IdeaScale, you know what to do. And Nick, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your expertise, and thank you for the knowledge you shared with the audience. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on your show, Ike. You were a phenomenal host.